Great. Thank you, Amina. And also thank you, James and Keelan, for joining us, who joined me from the UK as well as myself. So good to have the UK contingent here with me. And a massive thank you for James for the traditional Bavarian dress as well. Kudos to you. That deserves a round of applause. Thank you. So the topic of today is easy ISO and challenges and best practices for information security management systems. And what is interesting is we've got three perspectives. We have two customers, but we can also speak from the perspective of DataGuard becoming ISO certified ourselves. So we've got three journeys, although they are the same journeys, but all with different experiences. So that will hopefully make for a really fruitful discussion with both James and Keelan. So moving on, I would like to just give a bit more of an explanation as to what DataGuard did and how we managed to get from practically a greenfield site to becoming ISO 27001 certified, with the key message being that DataGuard's journey is the same as yours. So just for context, we have Keelan from Behaviour Labs, who has already completed the journey. So we refer to that as our sort of step 8, step 9, already certified into continuing support. And James is probably halfway through. We're looking to certify in Q1. Is that correct? Yeah. So just before we get into DataGuard's journey, I just need to ask, so what is the next core step for you? Because we're finished. You've got some work to do. What is the next big step for you before we go into DataGuard's journey and how we succeeded with 27001?
Got it. Well, firstly, just a quick thank you to DataGuard for inviting me out here. I'm very grateful indeed. It's been absolutely wonderful. Our step at the moment, we are finishing up writing the policies, and we are getting to the stage of thinking about doing our own internal audit before DataGuard does its internal audit. So that's the rough sort of the pipeline that we're at.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So from DataGuard's side then, and we followed our 8-step journey, the same journey that we advised to our customers. A few learnings from me. I've implemented ISMSs across different organisations, but never really in a fast-paced startup. And what was really interesting is, for us to be successful, we had to really get early stakeholder engagement. We knew we needed to do it. It was a strategic decision to become certified. But with the fast-paced business that we are, things move very quickly. So it's keeping a pulse on the button and making sure that you've got the stakeholder buy-in, but not just from the beginning, but continuously. And interestingly, booking an appointment with certification bodies. This is really interesting. This was a really big requirement for you, right, Keelan? So you had very tight timeframes. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so, is this on? Or no? Yeah, fine. Okay, cool. So we kind of started on our journey at the end of last year. So we started getting requests from clients to get certified as a minimum standard for working with the financial industry. And then we started looking at things internally, but we didn't really have a good idea of what the timelines are like. And then we found out with your help that actually there's quite a bit of a backlog in terms of people wanting to get certified. So if you go about it, first thing you should probably do is try and find an audit date and work backwards towards it.
Absolutely. So that early engagement is really key. It's an extremely popular standard, and even to actually get your certificate issued, there's also a time lag there. So early engagement with certification bodies is really important. So just moving on briefly before we really get into both James and Keelan's perspectives, where we'll also get more of an overview on the organisations you're from, who you're representing, and your specific journeys. We also found that we engaged employees quite early as well, not only with general security awareness training, but also explaining why we're doing an ISMS in the first place, what it means for individuals, and what we need from them, what role they play as DataGuard employees in the overall ISMS. And then have a plan. I mean, that sounds obvious, but you do need to go into this with a clear plan, a clear structure. There's a lot of moving components, so having a plan and following that plan, sticking to it, is really important. So moving on, I'm going to hand over to Keelan. So Could you just give us an overview on Behaviour Labs? You've already had a lovely intro from Amina, but if you can go into a bit more detail about the Behaviour Labs as an organisation, that would be great.
Okay, sure. So we started at the end of 2018, primarily working as a consultancy. So we work with asset managers and portfolio managers to kind of change the way they make investment decisions. So if you think about the asset management industry, you tend to have the passive types, which are like ETFs and kind of follow the market. And then you get the active type of investments where someone will actively pick, I'm going to invest in Google and Apple, but not in this one. And when you have that kind of decision making, you tend to have bias. So we look at all their trade history and trade activity, their investment theses, and also collect things like emotional data, and then run it through our algorithms and our systems to kind of be able to say, okay, Kyle, if you're a portfolio manager, in these situations, you're subject to loss aversion bias, and this costs you 1.5% a year. And then we help them correct that over time. So because we get every single trade they've ever done, the rationale behind it, and their emotional data in terms of how you felt when you made that decision, for us, that's basically we have the secret sauce for any client. And all your clients are direct competitors. So data security and privacy is super, super key. Otherwise, they won't even go anywhere near you. So that's kind of how we ended up there. We kind of progressed along that path as a consultancy for, 2-3 years? And then we got to a fortunate position where we had more clients than we could service. So at the start of last year, we pivoted to becoming a fintech, building a SaaS product around our analytics and our methodology, and have grown. I think we've basically quadrupled the team in about a year and done our ISO certification, and now we're looking forward towards SOC 2 and other ones as well.
Excellent. So what would be the biggest risk without ISO certification? So the reverse question of why did you get it? So what would be the risk without having it?
So for us, we were able to capture some contracts with clients initially. So if you work with a big asset manager, they'll have a couple hundred funds that they operate. Or you get 1 or 2 or 3. But to really scale within their organizations, we have to hit certain minimum standards. And it's the financial industry, so they're quite tight. So effectively, we got told, you have to hit this bar at least, or no deal. So it's very much make or break for us.
And I have to ask again, we had a conversation outside, and James, you asked a great question. James asked, Kaelan, how did you find the external audit experience? And you had some good insights there. Would you mind just sort of repeating some of those topics? And I think I'll hand over to James to expand on that question if you wanted.
Sure. Yes, so we're in the process of liaising with the auditor that we're going to have, and we have a rough idea for what's going to happen, because obviously we know they're going to mark our homework. But I'd love to know more about how detailed and how thorough they will be.
Do you remember in school, the strictest teacher you ever had? I was shocked at how thorough they were. Because you think you go through all this work and you do all the policies, and there's so much material that they can't possibly cover all of it, but they will. And they will drill down on the most minute detail and kind of pull you up because you forgot this one point in the standards. Not to freak you out, but yeah. It's not a terrible experience. It's kind of gratifying in the sense that you actually go through it, but you need to know what you're doing and you need to evidence that you're actually implementing it. And I think that part was quite figuring out okay, you need to be able to show it.
Thank you. What is really interesting with your case as well is your time from zero to certification was fast. So speed was really key in your personal case. Hence engaging the auditor early, engaging DataGuard early to meet those timeframes. From the overall experience, how were you able to stick to that timeframe? What do you think you did well?
So I think I was quite lucky in that the entire team was kind of behind it. They understood how critical it is to the business, and everyone kind of got really engaged. It's a lot easier to do when there's only about 10, 11 at your view. But we kind of set that deadline first initially with you guys, with BSI, and then just worked backwards from it and managed to get everyone on board. It's not easy. Because there's one thing writing policies, the other thing trying to implement them and change the behavior. But if you manage to get your team engaged enough and you push enough to not quite shove it down their throats, but you really make the point across, and you try and make it a little bit rewarding for them. I think that's where we kind of did quite well in terms of moving quickly.
Great. And another question, which I found really interesting, just speaking to you earlier, you mentioned that as soon as you certified to 27001, you jumped straight into Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials, just for the audience, it's a UK assurance security scheme, primarily run out of the UK. It is prescriptive, but in a different way to ISO 27001. So how did you find... how did that 27001 prepare you readiness-wise for Cyber Essentials? Was there a correlation? Did it help?
I think it definitely helped. So they're very different. One's a lot more in terms of system setup and administration, so how you're setting up Azure and user access and everything. But having had the procedures and policies in place from ISO, you can kind of do that stuff a lot more, I don't know, it's a lot more straightforward, it's a lot easier. You kind of know what you're doing and how it fits in together. So that bit was quite quick. It was almost a matter of just setting up the right settings because you already had a framework and everything in place for InfoSec. It was quick. So we did ISO, and then the next morning we had the Cyber Essentials, and then that one went super quick. That one was quite easy as a result.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really interesting insights. Okay, so let's move on. Let's speak to James. Same for you, James. Can you just give everyone a bit of an overview on who Bayes Consulting are, and we'll go into some questions as well.
Got it. So we are data scientists, which is a very broad term, as I'm sure you've learned. We're not a body shopping consultancy. We solve people's problems for them using their data and other people's data as it suits. We use the word maths, not magic, and that's what we bring to the party. And we have worked with the government building synthetic data, so we've had government data, classified government data given us to us. We've worked with charities, one particular charity which had a lot of victims of sexual assault data on a queuing problem, but once again, we're handling a lot of very sensitive data there. And finally, we've worked with much more standard private industry on some dashboarding and some predictions and some digital twins. So we've had sort of confidential IP hanging around on our systems as well. We are a remote company with an office. So we have a managed office which doesn't fit the entire company in it. We all work from home mostly. So we have that as sort of the issues we have floating around it. We have a lot of classified information coming to us. Everyone is working remotely, and we have to make sure that we keep our clients' data safe. That's what moved us into the ISO 27001 journey. And just to sort of build on the Cyber Essentials stuff, we did Cyber Essentials first. And I think the key word that sticks with it is essentials. It's the sort of thing that you can change that afternoon if the settings aren't right. End of questions. The ISO 27001 stuff is much more about making sure you have the continuous processes in place to make sure you continue to be good and continue to improve.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So two perspectives. One, ISO, Cyber Essentials ISO. Perhaps, yeah, who knows, perhaps we need Cyber Essentials to complete the pack as well, but we can talk about that later. So you're currently 2/3 of the way through, roughly speaking, so you're finishing off a few remaining policies. So sort of a twofold question. The first one, how has your journey been to that point? And what policies do you have left to finish?
Got it. So terrifying, I think, is the first word I would use. We came with Cyber Essentials Plus thinking, all sorted, this will be easy. And I am, was completely terrified by the number of rocks to look under to sort of see, oh, we have a problem down here. So Bayes has jumped from being a micro company to a small company, which I would argue is the biggest jump to make, because a small company has to behave like a large company, so you need all the processes in place. And putting everything together and realizing we have all these issues has been terrifying, but such a good thing to do. We started the whole process because we needed it to be on a framework. Like I said, we do a lot of stuff with the government, hence we got Cyber Essentials Plus. The other classic one they ask for is for ISO 27001. But looking back on it, I am very pleased we started doing it because we are making the company safer by doing this, even though people aren't asking us for it as much as the government does. The process has been very simple. DataGuard does a very good system where they give it to you piecemeal to sort of say, right, let's spot all your problems. Now let's start to fix this one. Now let's start to fix that one, rather than throwing the entire dictionary at you and saying, get all these processes in place. Our biggest challenge, I think, has been time and resource. We're a very small company with a capital S and a small s as well. And that means that everyone is double hatting, triple hatting, trying to do several things. And the crocodile that's nearest the canoe is not always getting the processes in place for ISO 27001. So we found balancing today's big worries with the quarter's big worries has been one of the biggest issues we've had.
So would you sort of frame that as just complete competing priorities? So you've got an agenda, the leadership has an agenda, and you sometimes don't meet in the middle?
Yes and no. It's the classic, it's the Eisenhower decision matrix of important, urgent, and not important, not urgent. And it's important, not urgent, because it's going to take you 6 months to do it, but that doesn't mean that you can try and do the whole lot in the last month, if you see what I mean. We've had to trickle through it. The regular drumbeat of meetings with a consultant has forced me to do it. We were lucky that we got a cybersecurity intern coming to work with us, so guess what he was doing for a couple of weeks? But that's the way we did it. We were trying to sort of make sure that we were always doing at least a little bit. And I've been trying to extract myself from other parts of the business. My job is essentially to be wheel grease for the company, to make sure the company turns nicely. So I've been trying to sort of let go of other parts so that I can focus on this, because it's an important one to get right at the implementation. And then as it rolls, I can watch it rather than actually have to do it.
Did you encounter any of those same issues? Did you run out of steam mid-flight in the project, or did you? Clearly, your timeframes were short, and it was speed was key, and you achieved it in a quick time. But in terms of that stakeholder buy-in, and not just from leadership, but from sponsors who are actually running the project, colleagues helping you with the project, did you face the same issues with conflicting priorities? Did that happen on your side?
Yes and no. So I think, from my perspective, and being part of the management team, I think all of us are quite aligned on needing to do this. It's funny you say about pulling yourself out and doing things piecemeal. My perspective on some of it was that, like, you come up with certain policies and procedures, and you look at them and you're like, I actually kind of need to implement something like this anyway. Like, now I'm doing it as part of a bigger thing, but it's prescribed and it's helped me kind of do it in a best practice kind of way. So it's saved me some time in some weird ways. In terms of getting buy-in from other stakeholders, so you'd have different department heads. And I think probably the one that was most difficult for us was the tech team, because they're developers and they like to do things a little bit their own way, but it's also not throwing any stones, I'm sorry. It kind of getting them to understand that, like, actually this affects you too, and it's important that you also adhere to this and you implement it in your own practices. And it's not nice, it's not fun, trying to get a whole team of Mac users to install an antivirus, because they don't like that, because Macs are super safe. But those kind of things are things that you do need to kind of get over the line if you want to do things in the best way possible and kind of tick all the boxes. So some resistance, but nothing that was, I don't know, too difficult to overcome, I think.
Great, thank you.
Except the antivirus.
Oh, well. So just another question for you, James. So throughout the entire project, so far at least, you mentioned already when we spoke about the continued support and the performance evaluation of an ISMS. Is it working as intended? Is it improving over time? 2/3 of the way through, do you have any ideas about how you might achieve that? What does a operational ISMS look like for you?
So we have already, exactly as you were saying, there's a lot of stuff that we've encountered in implementing an ISMS, which is actually a good thing to have done and has actually arisen for other reasons. So data deletion, a classic example, and encryption of your data at rest for when you try and get rid of it. That was a problem that came up because a client wanted that in isolation. They never used the word ISMS or ISO 27001, but it was there. So a lot of what we're doing with it makes sense to be done and would need to be done at some point anyway, and this is entirely formalized and sort of put together, which is good. The continuous evaluation and monitoring, it's essentially setting up the rhythm. So we've worked out what we need to do and when, and so you will quarterly review things. We have a better way of event reporting. It used to be that people would just talk to each other and say, oh, we had this issue with the AWS servers. Now it's recorded, now it's written down, so that when people need to work out what has happened, we have a list of when it happened, who spotted it, who dealt with it, etc., etc. So it's, I think, to jump back on it, it's process improvement. It's making sure the processes are in place and that they work for people, with the big problem being you can't just dump this on top of a team, especially a tech team, and say, now you're doing this, you're completely changing from what you've done. We had to work with them to say, how are you doing this? We need to include this element. What is the easiest way of including this element? For example, event reporting is a Slack channel. That's what our team use. It's what they want to use. It's the logical place to do it. Anything that gets flagged to be a major event then gets written up. But it means that they're not doing anything they wouldn't do. They just have a different Slack channel that they would use anyway.
Did you want to add anything to that?
It also gives you quite a few KPIs and objectives to kind of be able to monitor and tweak the organization as a whole. So a lot of the KPIs you kind of end up following as part of ISO framework. You can kind of use them to, like, okay, this is actually running properly. Do I need to focus on this a bit more? So it kind of builds into the BI side of things and sets you up quite well for expanding that later on.
Yeah, and I think you can probably just summarize that as just repeatable tasks. You know, one of the myths is you become certified, or rather one of the mistakes is you become certified and then you just put your ISMS in the top drawer and leave it until the next audit, which really isn't the way to operate a good ISMS, at least in our eyes. So, you know, what we really try to do at DataGuard is support customers through the entire 3-year cycle of the certificate. Arguably at year 1, the tough work starts. You have to do those repeatable tasks. You have to do an internal audit again. You have to do risk management. You have to have annual surveillance audits. So it's very much using the framework of the standard and understanding what KPIs are you monitoring and measuring, and how can you demonstrate that this is not just something we've done as a tick box, but this is growing with our organisation. We are monitoring our risks ongoing. We understand and appreciate what our critical assets are, which will change month, year. So it's definitely using that framework to really kind of just strip everything back and what am I monitoring? How can I get better over time? And it makes the surveillance audits much easier because you know it hasn't become static. It's an evolving loop, and you know, you're not having to be flustered and run around last minute to get all your data together to pass the surveillance audit. So thank you for that. It's really interesting. So, you know, I was especially excited to have this discussion among us three because we do have 3 perspectives. You know, 2 completed the journey, 1 is halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through, as you mentioned. Very different industries, different sets of challenges. But you know, what we really want to do is sort of to summarise a few things that we've been discussing and try to understand what we can actually learn from each other. And you know, I think is really understanding, first of all, I think we've all identified it individually, is what is your key driver for wanting to become certified. And we get from our customers, from prospects, a lot of the time, it's a commercial driver. You know, being honest, it's a supply chain request. It's customers asking, "Are you certified? We can't progress with an RFP or a tender because of this ISO certification we don't have." But from your perspective, what I've heard is actually the other way around. It's yes, that's a really good tick in the box, but you really wanted to have an organisational-wide approach to information security, especially speaking to you and you explaining how you might want to monitor an ISMS moving forward. It's really clear that that's important for you. Would you agree? You know, a key driver for ISMS, identifying that and sticking with it, would be good for your success moving forward?
100%. As you said, we started doing this because we needed it for tenders, for business reasons, and it's the, you know, like the Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. We did not know what we did not know until we started doing this. And looking back with the benefit of hindsight, this is something that we would want to have because we want to be sure we're keeping our clients' data safe. I say to our data scientists, Fort Knox has gold, Bayes Consulting has data, we need to keep it as safe, and this is a wonderful tool we have to reassure our clients, your data is in good hands, we know what we're doing, we're monitoring it.
Amazing. And Caleb, what would be your advice to industry peers, people in a similar situation, but mainly with tight timeframes?
Start as early as possible.
Sure.
Sorry. No, I mean, so my journey with you guys, it was a bit different from yours. So I'd already gone down the path of kind of getting my hands on as many templates as possible, trying to get my head around it a little bit before I engage DataGuard. That, in hindsight, I may have created slightly more work for myself, but it also is a really good way to get myself quite familiar with the standards, right? Because you know, I'm on my own, I'm wasting my evenings kind of reading it. Good bedtime material, puts you straight to sleep sometimes. But it's quite good. So if you get yourself quite familiar and you understand at least what's coming ahead to a certain extent, it lets you kind of plan ahead quite a bit better and move a bit faster.
Okay. I mean, we've talked about positive, experiences, but something must have gone bad. Anything? What didn't work out so well? What didn't go as planned? What would be something if you could do it again? How would you do it? If it was plain sailing, then we should definitely speak over a beer so we can get some more information on how you did that.
I don't know. I think we struggled to figure out a good way to train everyone, to get everyone engaged with it. We start, either sending them, these are policies you got to read. We made some quizzes. We try to put people on the spot a little bit. That's a bit of a hard one to figure out, and also getting people to not just read them and, okay, fine, I've gotten 10 out of 10 on this, but actually start changing their behavior. We found that when it came to certain things such as passwords and kind of locking your computer on time, we ended up forcing them. So we went into the Azure, changed the settings, and just implemented automatic timeouts. You got a little bit called out in front of the rest of the team in the morning meeting, but that kind of stuff, it sounds a bit silly, but the behavioral change part is the hardest part. There's, especially if you've got more and more people.
Sorry, I was just laughing. I was looking at our lovely customer Gareth over there who did the exact same thing, just used the good old settings in Azure to do automatic screen lockout. So, I mean, it's probably the easiest way. But
it's a bit dystopian, but if you take the choice away.
Exactly. Good stuff. Okay, so I think it wouldn't be a good panel if we didn't have some takeaways, and then we can finish with a couple of questions from the audience. I know Mark is waiting with bated breath with a couple of questions. Once we've done this, you can fire away. So from my perspective, I really want to kind of wrap all this up and just give some ISMS implementation best practices. We've mentioned stakeholder buy-in and executive support. It's truly important. You're not going to have a successful project without it. And in the end, that culture, that behaviour change starts from the top down. It's really hard to go in reverse and go bottom up if you don't have the support and buy-in from your board and from your executives. We did that early on at DataGuard. It was very successful. Our strategic decision to become 27001 compliant will be very different to yours, and yours will be very different to other customers. But what we all have in common is that we got that support from the very beginning. And employee awareness, you actually just touched on it just then. It's not only the InfoSec awareness training that is a requirement, but it's also speaking to the wider workforce of why you're doing it in the first place, what role they have to play in the ISMS, how can they help, what are the do's and don'ts, and also, to be frank, how to actually behave in an external audit, because you've almost run a marathon and tripped at the last mile if you don't enable your workforce with information on how to interact with auditors and how to conduct themselves in an audit. You mentioned it was like choosing your most strictest teacher at school and then marking your homework. They probably will find something wrong with it.
I will say, just to add to that, what I actually found really, really useful was your academy. I think I didn't realize at the time how kind of clued in / really not clued in so different people on the team were. So that was actually a really good framework to get the basics in, get everyone familiar, and kind of start introducing them to more behavioral specific policies and concepts. So I think that was super useful for us.
Oh, thank you. That's really good feedback, and it is interesting when you actually get the you get the results back from these fairly gamified, targeted at users InfoSec awareness courses. That there is probably a human security gap here as opposed to a technical one. So that's it's always I think that one of the biggest threats is human error, isn't it, when it comes to information security, of course, and that of privacy, as we've already heard from some of these discussions today. Number 3, just wanted to elaborate on critical assets. And why do we put emphasis on the word critical? Is because we care about laptops, of course, but we care about our core infrastructure more than the laptop. We need to identify what we're protecting. I need to protect the CIA, the confidentiality, the integrity and availability of critical assets. So we prioritise the important things, right? It's really important that we really get a good idea on the most critical assets versus something that, to be honest, you can swap out in a couple of hours versus a core switch, which could cause a lot of damage, not only monetary damage, reputational damage. So it's understanding what are critical assets. In terms of other best practices, be really, really prepared for internal audits. You know how long these things can take. They're actually a really good telltale on what you should expect in the external audit. So really pay close attention to the internal audit phase, as well as the management review, another requirement, which you can actually drive both through our platform today using it in the existing feature. So, for example, when you do your repeatable tasks, when you do your internal audit management review, drive that through the platform, for example.
I'm not going to lie and say I do at the moment.
But you will.
We're looking to migrate everything over.
Exactly.
On the management review, I was going to say, one thing that we've learned is you're not going to pick the right things to track from the get-go. So we've actually started doing, we got our certification and we did a management review every month for the last 3 months, and then we're going to do it every quarter in cadence with our internal audits. It's actually quite handy because you figure out that you got the certification, but you're quite way off the mark in terms of some things. Yeah. So you need to kind of keep going on.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So we've already covered the value of being organised. We've also covered it's important to engage early with external bodies. So lastly, I want to finish on, before we just move on to a couple of questions if there is time, and it's that of planning for the full certification cycle, of which it runs on 3 years. And very often we've already mentioned that an ISMS or the entire project is done 6 months, for example. You walk away from it, and then you don't pick it up again until the next audit. But also from a budgeting standpoint, understanding what are the cost implications of using certain certification bodies. It's not just getting certified for the first time, it's the cost of keeping your certificate on that 3-year cycle is really, really important from budgeting and resource points of view. So, some key tips for you both moving into this state of continued support where the ISMS will show its true strengths and start to grow and start to develop over time. Is really understanding that full cycle.
I don't know what I was going to say. If you look for an auditor, I know there's BSI, there's Lloyd's Register, and there's loads of other little ones. Depending on the industry you're in, whether it's here or in the UK, it's worth going for the bigger guys and having it done properly and by someone that your clients will recognize, rather than going for the guy that I know is in a shack in Newcastle or something, and technically it's a certificate, but no one's going to really take it seriously.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's value in choosing the household names and the recognisable names for sure. And they all offer different flavours of and styles of auditing as well. BSI, for example, position themselves as more strategic business partners as opposed to external auditors. So there's value in that, and obviously a lot of value in the name. Look down at any drain, you'll probably see their kite mark, but that naturally drives up the day rate. They're typically more expensive versus the guy in their shed in Newcastle. I'd like to get his number, but no, it's a great point. So that comes to the end, of this panel. I think it's been really interesting to speak to you both. I'm sure we'll continue speaking after this and with a beer in our hands. But I'd love to go to Mark. He had a really great question to the panel. So can we pass Mark a microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, so I actually wrote down 2 questions during your panel here. Both of them were answered, but the third one go to Kalen. Kalen, you made it clear very early on that for you guys it was a no-brainer to go ISO because your customers are asking for it. Do you see any good reason to also do it for your investor side of stakeholders, getting your next financing round through? Is it relevant there also?
I think it was relevant okay, so for us, we're in a fortunate situation where I think a lot of our angel investors also help us get a lot of customers, so there's that angle of it in terms of sales. But for them, I think before certification, we were somewhat managing things quite well to an extent, right? It was a bit haphazard and wasn't really well coordinated centrally, but we were doing a fairly good job. I think as far as our investors are concerned, it was can you do the right things that are maybe non-critical from a product perspective or delivery perspective that actually enable you to scale into these customers? Because if we, like I mentioned before, if we didn't have the certification, it would have been very difficult for us to get our foot in the door and then expand within a large organization. So then we'd be stuck kind of just doing little bits and bobs, right? So for them, having this enablement of scaling, I think that is quite reassuring. And I guess that question very much depends on the industry, but for us it was important.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have maybe one more time for one more question. Please
Sure.
correct me if I'm wrong. Did anybody else have a question for James or Kaylin?
James, the question for you. I think you both are very experienced with regard also to the topic employee awareness and how to push that topic. But I think from both standards, exercising this internally and then being a supporter for companies, what would you say can you do in order to keep people continuously engaged apart from the training? Because there's a lot of awareness around the ISO certification, so everyone is kind of at stack, and then once it's done, everyone is happy and the topic drops a little bit. And I think that's a topic for continuous involvement. So any best practice you can share from your perspectives that helps you keep the topic on top of the mind? I mean, for us, it's easy. We're a data privacy company, but I think for someone like your position, it's harder.
Got it. We use two which work very well. One is campaigns, as people say. So we did an anti-phishing one recently, and I essentially schedule them in so they happen once every quarter. We will do something so it just comes to the top of people's heads. The other thing we do is we try and bring about a culture of continuous learning development in Bays, because maths doesn't fundamentally change, but new clever things come up. So every other week we have a learning and development hour where someone presents. And that's routine, whatever happens, and we take it in turns to go through. So sometimes you learn about marketing, and whenever I go through, I always try and sort of bring up an interesting thing about it, just so the seeds are constantly sown in the back of people's heads, even though we're not sort of certification chasing. So I would think from yourself as the person who is making sure that we remain certified, schedule it into your diary, come up with something clever to do at a regular, but not too regular basis. And if you can push people to say, right, you need to do some learning and development that is not directly related to the current work you're doing, gently suggest, like, well, there's data privacy, you could have a look at that, or you could look at data protection, that would be interesting, and just nudge them that way as well.
Great,
right.
thank you. I think we've reached time.
Thank you very much.
Again. Cheers.
Thank you very much, James, Kaylin, and Carl. You can just put them here. Thank you.